I'm Jeff Paur, senior writer for RealTime Fantasy Sports, and welcome to another edition of the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. On today's RealTime Fantasy Sports Show, I'm going to give you 5 hot starts for week 2 of the fantasy football season. These are going to be guys you'll want to get in your fantasy lineups this week. I think they're going to have big weeks and do well for your team. Hopefully you have them on your roster, at least some of them. All right, let's get to them now. 5 hot starts. My first one's Nick Chubb. Chubb had a ho-hum first week of the season. He ran 10 times for 60 yards, also caught a pass for 6 yards. So he had a decent showing against a very good Ravens defense. But this week, his task is much easier. He faces the Bengals. He had a 100-yard game against them last year. Cincinnati allowed 155 rushing yards in their opener. I think Chubb gets going in this matchup and has a big showing in week 2. Another one of my hot starts is Emmanuel Sanders with New Orleans. So he did catch just 3 passes for 15 yards this last week, which wasn't great, but he found the end zone in that game, so that was a positive. And Michael Thomas is hurt. This leaves Sanders as the number 1 receiver for New Orleans. I think this bodes well for Sanders to get a lot of targets as long as Thomas is out of the lineup. Plus, he has a favorable matchup this week against Las Vegas. They allowed the 7th most fantasy points to receivers last week in their opener, and they allowed 239 passing yards to Teddy Bridgewater, who we all know is not exactly a guy that lights it up through the air. So I think the Saints will have success throwing the ball, and Sanders will do well in this matchup. Another hot start for me this week is Zach Moss. So the good news for Moss was in the opener, he found the end zone. That was a positive. He had 12 touches as well. That was good. But he managed just 27 total yards. That was bad. But either way, it was good to see Moss get a lot of touches in the offense. He's going to be a big part of the offense along with Devin Singletary, at least splitting the work. And it looks like he might be getting the goal line chances as well. So that's a positive. And he plays the Dolphins this week. The Dolphins were torched on the ground last week, allowed 217 rushing yards. So I think Moss and the entire Buffalo rushing attack is going to post big numbers in this matchup. I would get Moss in your lineup as maybe a low-end number 2 or flex option for your team. All right, another hot play for me is Paris Campbell with the Colts. He had 6 catches for 71 yards on 9 targets in the opener. He was the top receiver for the Colts, and we know Phillip Rivers likes to target the slot receiver, and that's what Campbell was playing. Got a lot of work in the opener. He plays Minnesota this week. They allowed the most fantasy points to receivers last week. Vikings have all sorts of issues at cornerback because of turnover at the position. It just looks to be a weakness for their team right now. So I think Campbell's going to be able to build on his good showing in week 1. All right, my last hot start is Dak Prescott with Dallas. So he had just an okay first game of the season, 266 passing yards, a touchdown without a turnover in the opener against the Rams on the road. That's a pretty good defense, though, pretty good secondary. He has a much easier task this week playing Atlanta. They allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks, and I think Prescott's going to have a monster game in this matchup. I think he could end up leading all fantasy QBs in scoring this week. He really has that opportunity to do so. All right, that's my 5 hot starts for week 2 of the fantasy season. Hopefully you have a lot of hot starts in your lineup, and I look forward to bringing you another video in the coming days. This has been Jeff Paur for RealTime Fantasy Sports. Have a great day.